Chris Vaughn Jr. is a U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, returning home from combat deployment overseas to his small town home in Kitsap County. Walking through town, he notices that things have changed, like more bad substances on the street, and the closure of the town mill. Two cops, Sheriff Watkins and his deputy, pull up and recognize Chris, as they have heard a lot about him and offer him a ride to his home. Chris prefers to walk, but Watkins insists. On the way home, he learns that the previous sheriff that he knew died under suspicious circumstances. The cops drop Chris off and he is greeted by his sister Michelle, mother, and father, Chris Vaughn Sr., telling them that he is back home for good. He also meets Pete, his stubborn nephew, who is upset that Chris has taken over his room. Chris's best friend, Ray, then comes over and the two catch up on old times before inviting Chris to a football match, as he has called up his old friends from high school. He then meets his old high school rival, Jay Hamilton, the new owner of the mill, who closed it down and opened his casino, who is pulled up with his team of guys for the match. The guys play, before Jay and his guys pull a dirty play on Chris and Ray, hurting Chris's knee. During the game, Chris notices Pete hanging around some bigger kids who are smoking, and approaches him afterwards, but Pete just rides off. Jay then invites Chris and his friends to have some fun at his casino. The guys lead Chris into a room, and pay for him to have a good time. He takes a seat, where a beautiful girl dances for him who he recognizes as his old crush Danny. The two exchange words and Danny recognizes his voice and sees his face before running out. Chris heads back downstairs where the guys are playing craps, and notices that the dealer is using a loaded dice. Chris calls him out and tells the other patrons to place bets, showing the other patrons that no matter what he rolls he will get a 7, which happens. The floorman then declares no payout. Chris demands his money and a fight starts. Even though he is outnumbered, Chris takes down a few guys before he is knocked unconscious with a cattle prod. He is taken to the basement by the security staff, where Jay's henchman and head of security, Booth, takes Chris's Special Forces medal, and uses a knife to cut Chris up before dumping him in the street to die. Chris is taken to the hospital where his entire family has come out in support. Sheriff Watkins turns up at the hospital and states that he wants to talk with Chris, ignoring Michelle when she demands he talk to who did this to her brother. Chris is discharged from the hospital and recovers at home for a few weeks, until one day Neil comes over to apologize to Chris for what happened at the casino, and tries to offer him a job and cash. But Chris turns both offers down and says he's going to the sheriff. Chris turns up at the sheriff's office to press charges, but Sheriff Watkins tells him that the casino is the main source of income in the town, and that the case is closed. Chris promises Watkins that he is not going to let this stand. Danny comes over, returning a jacket she took years earlier, and the two catch up, with Chris calling her out for working for and sleeping with Neil. Chris then gets an urgent call and rushes over to see Pete being loaded into an ambulance, and learns that he tried an illicit substance which his friends got from the casino. In a rage, Chris gets his gun and heads over but decides on using a plank instead. He heads inside, taking out guys left and right, before he and Booth get into a brawl and Chris knocks him out and takes back his medal. Before leaving, Chris smashes the window to Jay's office and the two make eye contact before Chris leaves. He jumps in his truck and drives away, but the sheriff intercepts him and Chris is arrested and put on trial for his actions in the casino. He refuses a guilty plea put forward by his lawyer and they go to court, where Jay's men all paint Chris in a bad light as a highly trained dangerous individual. Chris then realizes that his own lawyer is on Jay's payroll and fires him right there on the spot. Chris then decides to represent himself, much to the displeasure of Jay and his lawyer. Chris speaks to the jury, reminding them of all the bad substances and violence plaguing the town, and even shows them his scars. Chris promises that he will clean up the town, if the folks elect him as sheriff. The jury then finds Chris not guilty and the crowd celebrates, supporting his stand against the casino and Jay, and begin to call him sheriff. A few weeks later, Chris has become the new sheriff of the county, his wooden weapon now his signature crime-fighting tool. He pulls up at the office, where Watkins tries to have Chris keep his deputies on payroll, but Chris fires them all on the spot. The next day, Chris pulls over Jay as he is racing down the highway. The two exchange a few heated words with Jay threatening his life. Chris tells him that he will find the drugs, and reminds him to get his light fixed. Chris then makes Jay his deputy, as he needs help to understand how the illicit substances move on the streets. The two then go on to get information from users, until it leads them right back to Booth, where they find some of the white lady on him. The two then tie Booth up and tear his truck apart in front of his eyes, demanding information about the location of his operation. But Booth won't budge. Knowing that a war is coming, Chris asks Jay to stay with his parents while he stays at the station to keep an eye out. Danny comes by to look for him at the station, and one thing leads to another. and the old fire stick is rekindled right there on the office desk, torturing Booth even more. The next morning, Jay gives the call to start the attack. They first blow up his truck, much to the enjoyment of Booth. Chris goes to check, but Watkins and his guys start tearing the office apart with high-powered rifles, pinning Danny and Chris inside. At the Vaughn's house, Jay is awakened by the scent of something burning. He goes and sees that the men have broken into the house and he begins to fight with one, knocking him out. Meanwhile, Booth is asking Chris to help him, as Watkins and his men don't plan on sparing him either. Chris is hesitant as he wants the location of the drug base. Booth finally tells him about the old mill but ends up getting shot. Chris then shoots a hole in the floor of the station and he gives Danny a gun and tells her to wait for his signal. One of Watkins' guys tries to enter, but Chris blasts him back. Realizing that Chris is in the floor, Sheriff Watkins then goes full auto on the floorboards. Chris then calls out to Danny, who begins to fire her gun, distracting Watkins, and Chris introduces him to the 12 gauge. At the house, Jay is in a shootout with one of the goons and manages to pin him to the ground, knocking his lights out. One goon isn't dead though, but Chris Vaughn Sr. corrects that little error with a 12 gauge of his own. Seeing that everyone is okay, Chris then heads over to the old mill to confront Jay, who leads him into a trap. Jay attacks Chris, the two fight and Chris ends up falling and dislocating his knee. Chris runs off into the woods where he fixes his knee, but Jay is hot on his heels with an axe. The two go at it, with Chris barely using a piece of wood to defend himself. Finally, Chris tackles Jay into a tree, disarming him. And Chris uses the piece of wood to let Jay know how a broken knee feels. As he lays there, Chris tells Jay that this is his town now. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you can watch more movies like this. Thanks for watching.